I'm Ashton Addison from Blockwise Capital for Investment Pitch Media, and today on the Crypto Cowen Show, we have Don Gossen, the CEO of Nevermind. Don, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. How do we create the perfect NFT, and what are all the different use cases we can use NFTs for beyond digital artwork and memberships? I feel like the potential for where NFTs will add value is untapped, and there's so much different use cases that Web3 can really improve our lives and make it easier to do business and every day as well. And I know Nevermind is working a little bit on that. I would love to start off our conversation by just hearing a little bit about what you and your team are working on at Nevermind, and then we'll sort of dive into all the details.
Sounds great. So what we're working on is Web3 asset interactivity. And, it may sound a bit obscure to most people that are listening in or watching. Really, the concept is leveraging or unlocking the latent value that's attached to these assets. So when you think of existing NFTs, they're quite one-dimensional, right? Ashton, you can buy a Bored Ape, and then you can sell it to me. And the utility that's being provisioned there is in the liquidity, right? You and I can buy and trade on that asset, but really that's all we can do with it. What if I had a Bored Ape and you had a Bored Ape, and somehow we could merge those assets together to create a new Bored Ape, a new derivative piece of work? And then if we could do that, what do the rights look like? What's the royalty regime? If we were to then sell that derivative work, who gets what from the inputs to that output? That's what we're working on. We're moving Web3 to the next level, right? We're adding this level of remixing, of mix and matching, of merging, slicing and dicing these underlying assets and their associated payloads, so that you can create net new derivative works. And that can go from the art that we talked about that most people associate with NFTs, but it can also be applicable to the data assets that represent those NFTs, or different payloads like IP NFTs, etc. So really what we're focused on is in enabling the usage or the unlocking of that latent utility baked into those core assets.
Interesting. I feel like that has benefits to multiple parties as well. On one side, just looking at derivatives market in traditional finance, being able to just create different assets and bundles of assets. The derivatives market is like $1 quadrillion in market cap compared to the spot market, and you can create all these different new assets that people can trade with, speculate on, bring liquidity to. I feel like I've seen that a little bit in NFTs where, for example, if there's an ape or some NFT that's worth like $1 million, it's hard to find somebody to buy that. Or say that it represents a large building in the future that's worth $1 million or 10 million. How do we divide that or find other ways to bring liquidity and value into that asset? Is that something that you see this technology being used for, and what you're working with Nevermind?
Yeah, it could be, the fractionalization of these assets for sure. But that's just taking the one-dimensionality aspect of it and sort of magnifying that, right? And bringing in a larger ecosystem. What we are really focused on is making these assets interactive amongst themselves, and the theory here is that by doing so, you create a dialogue between actors in the ecosystem, so you get a more tightly coupled ecosystem. So what do I mean by that? I mean, you brought up derivatives in finance. It's conceptually the same, but that's dealing with securities, right? Just for sake of argument. What if you, instead of securities, you were dealing with data assets, right? And you then you're able to manifest net new assets from those points of origination, from those inputs, right? Combine them together to create net new data sets that can benefit everybody that contributed towards the creation of that output. And we're not just talking about the data owners themselves, we're also talking about the infrastructure providers, right? The Filecoins and Arweaves that may host these assets, the ceramics that may provide the schemas that, you know, make them searchable or queryable, right? As well as the data scientists and AI modelers that build the models that then compute across these assets. What we're doing effectively is orchestrating each of those services so that they can talk to one another, find the relevant services and assets that you need to solve a specific problem statement, bring it all together in one pipeline so that you can then execute the entire solution from end to end. This is, you know, quite broadly the application that we're building. And when we talk about this idea of interactivity, it is that whole flow. So there's a number of different steps that we need to accomplish in order to get to that end state of utilizing those assets and providing that new utility. But yeah, conceptually, that's where we're coming from, and that's where we're aiming to go.
Incredible. And how long has your team been building this, and where exactly is it at right now?
So we've been building it in stealth for 3 years. We came out of stealth earlier this year. We closed a funding round in April, and we've just been going through the paces of making it a bit more consumable, as well as putting the marketing collateral and PR and outreach to gain user base.
Okay, great. And do you see regular, you know, people that have already been involved in NFTs and people that are speculating on NFTs, do you see something that this, the technology your team is building sort of applies to those same people, or who do you sort of see trading and using the NFTs and derivatives?
Sure. I mean, I think generally, or you know, really extending this out, looking at the broader picture, we see everybody as a user of the platform, but unpacking that, take creatives, for instance, right? I brought up this Bored Ape example before. How familiar are you with Stable Diffusion? Have you seen this stuff that's coming out on the prompt AI generation?
Only a tiny bit.
Okay, so for those of your viewers that aren't familiar with it, it's some relatively new AI technology that has come out that allows you to use basically just everyday run-of-the-mill language to type in some words into an interface. Let's say, you know, a man looks at the moon on a starry night, right? The AI will take that, synthesize it, and give you a result set of images, usually about 10 images that are entirely synthesized by AI.
Wow.
You can do that in the style of different artists, right? And what's interesting is it's now led to a conversation amongst the art community of who actually owns that art, right? Because you could do it in the style of, say, Van Gogh and get your own rendition of Starry Night. But you could also do it in the version of a contemporary artist. If that model was trained using images from that contemporary artist, it's going to have the look and feel of that contemporary artist, and they may take an issue with that because they'll feel like you're infringing on their IP. The question becomes, can we solve that issue? Can we address that lack of attribution? And the answer is yes, by providing fine-grained fidelity on the provenance of where that source material came from, right? So if you had the reference images that the model was trained on from that artist, that's then used by an individual in an application to create their own derivative work, and then they go on to buy it or sell it or whatever, you can have that whole the flow of value in the form of royalties or some other form of attribution flow back to the point of origination, which in part is that artist, right? So now we start to address these questions around IP ownership, et cetera, which I think is wholly applicable to anyone in our industry, right? Whether it's BASE or it's OpenSea or super rare. These are all questions that they're trying to manage on an ongoing basis. The other side of things would be like in the DeSci space, right? Where, for instance, you have DAOs being set up to support research initiatives, right? And what they'll do, say in the case of a Vita DAO, they'll fund early stage research into longevity science. And the DAO itself will purchase the IP rights to that longevity research, and they'll provide additional funding for the researcher so that they can go on and continue their research and then maybe sell the new research back to the DAO, et cetera. What the DAO then can subsequently do is open those assets, those payloads, those CSV files, Excel files, whatever they are, up to other researchers in that space and provide them with net new data sets that they may not otherwise have access to, either because they don't know it exists or because they can't get access to it because they don't know the researcher that produced it, or a number of different issues. But yeah, so for them, this adds to the ability to aggregate information that can help from a scientific hypothesis and scientific method point of view to really prove out hypotheses and validate assumptions, etc.
Wow.
So broadly speaking, I think it's quite applicable technology. At the end of the day, it's data engineering infrastructure.
Yeah, no, great examples. And I have seen the updates with some of the AI imagery, and it's getting pretty good. Much better than I could create.
It's amazing. Just honestly, in the matter of 6 months, and some of this stuff has come out, the exponential growth. There's some charts online that you can see this stuff. The level of adoption. I think it took 3 years. The level of adoption that's for instance, Stable Diffusion has acquired in the last 3 to 6 months took Ethereum 3 years to do. Right?
Wow.
Like it's just this massive amount of adoption.
Yeah, and I feel like the AI is it's hard to tell. With creators creating content, they're almost competing with AI, and it's getting to the point where the AI improves so quickly. It's like the singularity. How do you compete, or how do we find positions for people to do that AI couldn't do better?
Well, and I think that's kind of the point we want to address. Do you need to compete? Right? Like in a perfect world, it would be a collaborative one where as an influencer, you're selecting the AIs that you want to leverage in order to enhance your community and your ecosystem, right? It's that enablement, right? That identification of the service, whether it's an AI service or a computation service or a storage service. That's what we want to enable, so that, for instance, an influencer, maybe in the Web2 space, right, just on Instagram or something, can discover these net new services that otherwise may not be available to them and make their end product, whatever that may be, even better.
Yeah, that's a good perspective on it. And you mentioned there a couple times about the royalties and sort of keeping track through the technology. I feel like that's one of the main benefits when the original creator, and when you introduce AI into it, it takes it to a whole nother level. But from what we've seen in the first round of NFT 1.0, if you create an NFT and you sell it and then they resell it, the smart contract can program whatever you'd like to have a 10% royalty or 1% or 0 if you're that altruistic. But I feel like that's something simple that's just like a major game changer from Web 2 technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think royalties at the end of the day come back to the digital manifestation of some governance structure. That's the real USP of blockchain, right? It's the ability to digitize that governance and make it a more fluid or liquid experience, right? This whole concept of like liquid democracy and being able to sort of like slot in, slot out, quadratic voting, all of these topics. That's the, I think the definitive piece that changes the tech, that really drives the technology that we're building on, right? Yes, the provisioning of that liquidity is interesting. That one-dimensional utility side of things, but it only goes so far, right? The question then becomes, what's the real game changer besides just native digital payment? And it's the ability to then govern on top of that and have the transparency of that governance across, if you so choose, all of the actors in that ecosystem.
Yeah, and I feel like this is a major topic that we're seeing major breakthroughs in right now with the growing out of DAOs and the functionality of them. And you mentioned about the scientific research, and I feel like a lot of different organizations are, even just traditional companies, are starting to consider integrating more democratic processes through a DAO or more distributed governance to the users and the customers to get them involved. And I feel like there's a lot to be built out still, because it's like reinventing companies on the internet and automating all that functionality, which is a lot. But I feel like this is a major turning point in the last year or two where DAOs are sort of becoming something that is very important to have in your business.
I think you're right. I think, especially in a Web3 context, purely Web3, I think that's true. I think at least understanding the decentralized organizations that are being established within your sphere of influence, like that's a prerogative. You need to have that type of understanding. But I think, we've been a part of a number of different DAOs, some good, some not so good. And it's a learning curve, right? There's still inefficiencies. The world is set up for centralized organizations, and it's just right now it's easier to operate within that context. But if you're willing to make the sacrifice and deal with some of the remaining shortcomings that exist with these organizations, I think the benefits, especially over time, the long tail effect of these organizations is going to be massive, right? I think, my opinion is that in the future, they'll be ubiquitous. They'll represent some of the largest organizations on the planet. We'll associate more with ecosystems as opposed to strictly with the brands and the centralized companies that are associated with them. I mean, think about it this way. There's a lot of conversation around how Twitter operates right now. Imagine if Elon had just come in, scrapped the executive team and said, we're going to slap a DAO in here. And everybody that's a member of Twitter, you guys get a vote, right? Pay $8 and you get more voting rights. That kind of thing. Like, we're kind of like, that would be an amazing experience. I don't know if it would fall over entirely, but, and then you have to start, there's still going to probably be delegation and things like quadratic voting and that sort of thing. But these are all problems to solve, and we'll work through the nuance of these issues over time. We're really just getting started. I think the next 5 years will be sort of, early stage organizational development from a decentralized context. And then after that, we'll probably start to see real inroads as we attack more structured commercial opportunities. Right now, where you see the successes with DAOs, I think is predominantly in underserviced arenas of economies. Early stage research that is notoriously underfunded, things like that. This is where having that like collective Kickstarter style engagement makes a lot of sense. As we work through the, like I said, the nuance of those governance parameters within that context, then we'll be able to go out and target larger opportunities.
I think it would be great to have a company as large as Twitter introduce some DAO functionality, and that's almost as exciting as some of the FANG companies putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. It's like the showing that Web3 is here to stay. So I'm really looking forward to that, and that's a good prediction. I didn't think about that, but I feel like that's a very good possibility that Elon would do that, and maybe they'll even be voting with Dogecoin or some other crazy integration.
Exactly. I mean, it'd be just as contentious as some of the other decisions he's made. You know?
For sure. So speaking of looking towards the future, moving into 2023, what are some of the main milestones and things that your team at Nevermind is looking at accomplishing over the next year?
So I think the next piece that we have is taking the simplification model and extending that even further. We're working on a set of interfaces that make it really easy to embed the technology in your existing website, whether that's just, your own existing art gallery or a fully fledged marketplace. What we want to enable is the ability to, if you don't have that ability currently, to mint and deploy NFTs, publish them, make their existence known. If you have a marketplace that already has an NFT engine, to integrate with the next step, which is the more advanced features on the computation side, provisioning the capabilities to do this, type of interactivity that I discussed earlier on. So that's the next major thing. Also working with a number of these DAOs, in particular in the DeSci space, to enable them to move to the next level, as opposed to just funding projects in their area of expertise or focus, being able to enable the analytics functions for each of these DAOs in a more decentralized fashion. And then also on the creative side, continuing to explore the art of the possible with things like Stable Diffusion and, this proliferation of AI technology and how that relates both to the artist and the consumer, but also to the Web3 space and the governance of those assets. So those are, three areas that we are looking forward to focusing on in the next year.
Looking forward to it, Don. And what's the best way for the viewers to follow along with your updates and learn more about the new initiatives?
I think if they come to our website, nevermind.io, and then use the link to join our Discord, then they'll have direct access to the entire team. They can keep abreast of everything that's going on. And we'll be happy to have them.
Sounds great. And I will leave the link in the description box below as well to make it easy. Thank you so much for your insights into the NFT space, DAOs, and where it's all going. I am looking forward to 2023, and I think it's going to be a great year for Web3. And I appreciate you taking the time. Let's definitely follow up in the near future, Don.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.